الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين ما دام ما في السماوات والأرضين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم إنا نسألك علما ينفعنا ويرفعنا اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا وشفاء من كل داء نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والإفادة والاستفادة والنفع والانتفاع والدلالة على الخير والهدى اللهم ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا واغفر لنا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم تقبل منا القليل وسامحنا بالكثير ولا تؤاخذنا بالتقصير يا نعم المولى ونعم النصير وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, we thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of His blessings that He has bestowed upon us, and we beseech Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in those blessings. We continue our reading of this very important seminal work on Islamic legal theory referred to as al-Waraqat, that of Imam al-Haramain. We are still dealing with certain very important terminologies before we actually start with Usul al-Fiqh proper. So the first concept we're going to be looking at today would be the concept of an-nadhar. We know that the word nadhara yanzuru literally means to look. Nadhartu ilayk, anzuru ilayk. I looked at you, I am looking at you. However, within Usul al-Fiqh, within Ilm al-Kalam, within many sciences in the Islamic sphere, the word nadhar takes on a technical meaning. What does the term nadhar mean? We look to that, and Imam al-Haramain provides the following definition. So what does he say? He says, an-nadharu, that nadhar, huwa al-fikru. The word fikr, as we will come to learn later, nadhar and fikr are really synonyms. But for now, an-nadhar huwa al-fikr. It is to reflect fi hal al-manzur fi, on the state of the object of inference. In other words, it is to reflect on a given phenomenon. An-nadharu huwa al-fikru fi hal al-manzur fi. Nadhar is to reflect on the state of the object of inference. وَالْإِسْتِدْلَالُ طَلَبُ الدَّلِيلِ. The second issue that we're going to be looking at would be the issue of istidlal. So in this one sentence, Imam al-Haramain is covering two concepts. The first concept is an-nadhar. An-nadhar is to reflect on something. Istidlal is the second concept which Imam al-Haramain is discussing. What does he say? What is istidlal? You and I, who are somewhat familiar with the Arabic language, we would know that the word istidlal is on the scale of istifa'al, and istifa'al has a certain speciality, and that is to request or to seek. So istidlal from the root letters dalil means talabud dalil. In other words, to seek a proof. Again, to reiterate, Imam al-Haramain in this one line is covering two concepts. The first concept is an-nadhar, which basically means to reflect regarding something, the object of inference, if you so wish to. And the second concept which he looks at is the concept of istidlal. What does istidlal mean? Talabud dalil, to seek a proof. We had mentioned earlier on also that the word nadhar and the word istidlal, they mean one and the same thing. Because in nadhar we find the meaning of seeking something out. And in the word istidlal, we also find the meaning of seeking something out, as is very clear, talabud dalil, to seek for a proof. Right now, what Ibn al-Firkah does is, he explains the relationship between nadhar, to reflect, and the word istidlal, in other words, to seek. What do they mean, and what is the relationship between the two? So he says, as if Imam al-Haramain is drawing a difference between the two. And this slide basically deals with these two phenomena. Nadhar we're going to be dealing with in the next slide. Here we're going to be looking at the word istidlal. So just reflect a moment. Imam al-Haramain defines istidlal as talabud dalil, seeking a proof. So he says the relationship between istidlal and nazar, istidlal is more specific than nazar. So if we look at nazar means to look in a general sense. Istidlal also means to look, but in a specific sense. Allow me to repeat that. Nazar is to look in a general sense. Istidlal is to look at something, but in a specific sense. What do we mean thereby? Ibn al-Firkah says that istidlal is more specific than nazar. In other words, reflecting on the state of the object of inference, in other words, reflecting on something from the angle of what is true and which ruling can be passed about it. Which ruling can be passed about it. So, for example, take any given phenomenon. What phenomenon can we look at? We look at the phenomenon of using a toothstick. So that's the phenomenon that we are looking at. Then, regarding the usage of a toothstick, we want to know what is the ruling of the usage of a toothstick. There are 5 rulings: compulsory, recommended, religiously neutral, reprehensible, or outright impermissible. So now we're going to basically be looking at a toothstick. What is the ruling of a toothstick? So now we find, and we look at the narration by way of example. The narration would be هو مطهرة للفهم ومرضاة للرب. لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك. Had I not feared for my followers, then I would have commanded them to use the toothstick. So now what do? We look into this narration. And when we look into the narration, we're looking at it from the perspective of what holds true to this narration. In other words, what can be said. So clearly we see from the Ibaratun Nas that had I not feared upon them, I would have commanded them. In other words, I did not command them. So this is istidlal. We are looking at a given phenomenon, the proof in this regard, and we are asking ourselves what is true to this particular narration, this object of our inference. And then to which rulings can be passed in relation to it. So here we say that we cannot pass the ruling of compulsion, of it being obligatory, but we could very well pass the ruling of it being recommended. So this type of looking into something, into the object of inference, which in this particular instance is our proof. And what do we want to do when looking at this proof? We want to mine that particular proof for what is true in relation to it, and what can we infer therefrom? In other words, which rulings can we extract therefrom? This type of looking, this specific type of looking into something, it is referred to as istidlal. So again, we take a step back, and the step is we're looking at the concept of nazar, and we're looking at the concept of istidlal. Nazar, we said, is looking into something but in a general sense. Whereas istidlal is also looking at something but in a specific sense. What do we mean by a specific sense? We mean that it is reflecting on the state of the object of inference from the angle of what is true and which ruling can be passed about it. That is what we refer to as istidlal. This is istidlal, as the objective of istidlal is the acquisition of proof that supports the sought after ruling. So the narration, لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك. Had I not feared for my followers, I would have commanded them to perform the siwak. So what did we do? We're making istidlal. What is the purpose of istidlal? We want to acquire the proof that supports a ruling. And what ruling do we have? The ruling we have is that of recommendedness. So this type of looking into something, because we want to acquire a proof, justification, substantiation for something in order to support a ruling, that type of looking into something is called istidlal. So it is looking, but it is a specific type of looking, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. We now go on to the next concept. Having looked at the specific type of looking, we're now going to look at a more general type of looking, and that is what we refer to as nadar. So not to lose the point here, what we are looking at is two things. النظر الفكر في حال المنظور فيه, and استدلال هو طلب الدليل. We are basically looking at two things. What does nazar mean and what does istidlal mean? Istidlal is a specific type of looking, as we explained a moment ago. Nazar is a more general type of looking. What makes it more general than istidlal, what we discussed a moment ago? So now we've done with istidlal. I'm going to my left hand side, your right hand side. What does nazar mean? Nazar juxtaposed to istidlal. Nazar is more general than istidlal. So what does it mean more general? Reflecting on the state of the object of inference. So again, we're looking at something, but we're looking at it now from the angle of conceptualizing its essence. We're basically just looking at something and we want to understand the essence of that particular thing which we are looking at. Now that is a general type of looking. When we're looking with the object of seeking out a proof and creating a general ruling for something, that is called istidlal. But when we're simply looking at something with the idea of wrapping our heads around it, our idea of making idrak of it, of conceptualizing it, that is called nazar, and that is the general form, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The last slide that we're going to be dealing with here in this part of the lesson, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, would just be looking at a few miscellaneous issues regarding the concept of nazar and regarding the concept of istidlal. So nazar and fikr are used interchangeably, as the term fikr is known to everybody, while the nudhar, the polemicists, those who engage in polemical discussions, debates, almost exclusively use the term nazar. So that's just a nice to know point. 2 points. Number one is fikr and nazar, they're basically the same thing. They are synonymous, as I mentioned earlier on. However, the polemicists, they use the word nazar, right? Almost exclusively when they're referring to this idea of looking into something in a general sense in order to understand the phenomenon, in order to conceptualize a particular phenomenon. They use the word nazar, and they don't use the term fikr, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Now, also, the word istidlal has a number of usages. We've looked at the word istidlal now a moment ago, and what meaning did we come to? We said istidlal is looking at something, but looking at it in a very specific manner. What was that specific manner? Looking at it with the idea of acquiring proof that supports a given ruling. Looking at something with the idea of acquiring a proof for a given phenomenon, like the hadith that we mentioned a moment ago. However, at the same time, it must be said that istidlal is sometimes used just to istadlaltu alayhi. It's simply used when a person mentions a proof. So the word istidlal is also used for dhikrul dalil, when a person simply mentions a dalil. So for example, let's just imagine we are in a fiqh class. So in a fiqh class, we are discussing what is the ruling of using the two-stick. So I would say that the ruling of using a two-stick is that it is sunnah. And then I say, the Prophet ﷺ said, لَوْلَا أَنْ أَشُقَّ عَلَىٰ أُمَّتِي لَأَمَرْتُ بِالسِّوَاكِ. Had I not feared for my followers, I would have commanded them to use the miswak. So what am I doing? Am I making istidlal? No. I'm simply making dhikrul dalil. I'm simply mentioning the proof. So mention of the proof is also referred to as istidlal. So sometimes, the word istidlal is used in the one meaning, and sometimes it's used in the other meaning. In an usul al-fiqh sense, not according to the fuqaha, in an usul al-fiqh sense, when we talk about istidlal, we are really talking about looking at something with the objective of acquiring a proof for a given ruling, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Now, so now we're going to leave nazar and istidlal behind, and now we are going to go to a new concept, another concept of equal importance. The next concept we're going to be discussing would be the concept of dalil. So dalil, this is very common. We say, what is your dalil, for example? Here we're looking at the concept of dalil from a usul fiqh perspective. What dalil هو المرشد إلى المطلوب. And if you wanted to, we go back to Nazar and Istidlal. What is Istidlal? Istidlal is Talabud Dalil, seeking out a Dalil. So when you say I'm seeking out a Dalil, what is a Dalil in and of itself? What is the definition of a Dalil? What is a Dalil? Now, normally when we say what is a Dalil, we talk about the types of Dalil. In other words, from the Quran, from the Sunnah, Qiyas or Ijma. Those are types of Dalils. Those are types of Dalils. But what is Dalil in and of itself? Dalil huwa al-murshid lil-matlub. It is that which indicates to that which is sought. Huwa al-murshid ila al-matlub. So dalil we translate here as evidence. What is evidence? Evidence is huwa, it is something, al-murshid, that leads to, what does it lead to? That which is sought. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The next issue we look at would be that this definition of dalil, we find that this definition accords with the jargon of the fuqaha. How is that so? As they apply the word dalil to whatever leads to what is sought, irrespective of whether it is categorical or probable. So here, it's very interesting that this particular definition of dalil provided by Imam al-Haramain, what does it say? Wal murshid al-matlub. It is evidence which leads to that which is sought. It is evidence that leads to that which is sought. Evidence that leads to that which is sought. That is the definition which Imam al-Haramain gives here. We find that particular definition, it accords very well to the jargon of the fuqaha, to the jurist. Why? Because the faqih, when he says this is the dalil for that, for example, you would find that the faqih, what does he say? You ask him, what is the ruling of using a toothstick? He tells you it is recommended. Then you tell him, what is your dalil? In other words, what is your evidence that leads to that outcome that you mentioned to me now, that it is recommended? He'll tell you, my dalil is the hadith. What hadith you ask him? He says the hadith that says, لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرت بالسواك. Had I not feared for my followers, I would have commanded them to use the miswak. That's my dalil, that it is sunnah. Now this particular dalil, the faqih is only concerned that this evidence, it actually leads to that which I seek. In other words, to establish the ruling. Which means what? It doesn't matter what the nature of the dalil is. Whether that evidence is probabilistic in nature or whether that evidence is categorical, it doesn't matter to the faqih. To the faqih, that is a dalil. It's evidence that leads to what is sought of. The nature of it, it's I don't draw a distinction, says the faqih, between what the nature of that evidence is. Now, so therefore, based on that, you find that they apply the word dalil to dhawahir, in other words, preponderant evidence, mu'awwalat, non-preponderant evidence, as well as logic. As long as you can categorize it as evidence, the strength or weakness of it is of no consequence to them. You still call it dalil. Why? Because it leads you to the evidence. Now, that is dalil according to the fuqaha, and also according to the usuliyun, as we see over here. However, there's another group of scholars that they look at the word dalil and they agree. And they say that what is dalil? Dalil is evidence that leads you to what is sought. Wal murshid al-matlub, that which leads you to what is sought. But they say you can only refer to that evidence as dalil. In other words, you can always use the word dalil to refer to the evidence when it is categorical in terms in its nature. So, for example, a person will ask you, why do you pray? What's your dalil for it? So if a mutakallim is asking you, what is your dalil for it? You must know that now you need to provide evidence of such a nature that is categorical and not probabilistic, because according to mutakallim, that evidence that you're providing there, in order for it to be labeled as dalil, it must be categorical. So now you tell him, Allah says, aqim as-salah, establish the salah. Now, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. We can argue here and there in terms of the example, but the concept as per our explanation is valid, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So I just want to read that from the text here. It says, the mutakallimun apply the word dalil to refer to categorical evidence and amara to refer to probabilistic evidence. So in other words, according to the mutakallimun, most of the proofs which the fuqaha are going to produce, they're going to label, because most of them are probabilistic in terms of the type of knowledge that they give you. So they're going to refer to all of that as amarat as opposed to dalil, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. We go on to the next concept, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next concept that Imam al-Haramain, very important concepts that Imam al-Haram, the next concept which he explains now is the concept of dhann, the concept of dhann. So what does he say? What is the definition of the word dhann? You might have heard before, هذا لا يفيد إلا الظن. This only gives you dhann. What does dhann mean? What does dhann mean? Both in terms of our fiqh works and both in terms of our usul fiqh works. What does the term dhann mean? So Imam al-Haramain says, وَالظَّنُّ تَجْوِيزُ أَمْرَيْنِ أَحَدُهُمَا أَظْهَرُ مِنَ الْآخَرِ. What does he say? Dhann is, and you see the translation provided here says that dhann we translate as probabilistic knowledge. What is that? What is dhann? Tajweezu amrayni is to deem it possible for each of two things to be the case, but for one to be more likely. So I'm going to give you a more loose and informal translation. Dhann, what is dhann? Tajweenu, deeming two things possible, however, the one of them is more probabilistic. So at the end of at the back of your mind, we're going to see the example come now. So dhann would be, I'm trying to think of an example other than an example which is mentioned in the text. Somebody tells you that is so and so coming to visit. So now what happens is there exist two possibilities. The one possibility is that he's going to come, and the other possibility is that he's not going to come. The possibility of him not coming is preponderant, and that possibility is referred to as dhann. So dhann again, if you look in light of the example, dhann is you have two possibilities. They're both possible. But then of the two possibilities, the one is more probable. Both possibilities exist, but the one exists 25%. The other one exists 75%. That possibility, the probable of the two possibilities, that is referred to as dhann, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So many times, you must have heard before that a person says, here's a particular text. The text may be categorical in terms of its establishment. In other words, a verse in the Holy Quran. But in terms of its indication to the meaning, they say dhanniyud dalala. It indicates on its meaning, but in what way? In a probabilistic way. So now that we have an appreciation of the word dhann, we now look to what does it mean when you say that this particular verse indicates to this ruling, but not in a categorical way, in a probabilistic way, in a dhanni way. What does it mean? It means that there are two possibilities. There exist two possibilities. The one possibility is a more probable possibility, and that probable possibility of 75% is referred to as dhann, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So what we're going to do now, after having gauged or wrapped our heads around and got a fairly good understanding, inshallah, of the concept of dhann, we're now going to break it further in terms of Ibn al-Firkah's approach. So what does he do? Firstly, he gives us a literal meaning of the term dhann, and this is also very interesting. What is the literal meaning of the word dhann? Normally in student circles, and sometimes even in scholarly circles, when you think about the word dhann, your mind automatically runs to the technical meaning of the word dhann, which basically means probable, or the preponderant meaning of two possible meanings. But the word dhann literally means certainty. And where do our scholars get this from? Our scholars get this from the Holy Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, how does the Arabic go? The English that is provided here says, and who well judge, in other words, who know with certainty that they are to meet the Lord. وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُمْ مُلَاقُ رَبِّهِمْ وَأَنَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ يَرْجِعُونَ. And they well know. So look at the verse. The verse is وَظَنُّوا, ظَنَّ, 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 ظَنُّوا, وَظَنُّوا. And you say, and they think. No, no, no. وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُمْ إِلَى رَبِّهِمْ رَاجِعُونَ. And they are certain that they are going to return to the Lord. So clearly what we find there would be that the word dhan being used in its literal meaning. And the literal meaning, the literal application of the word dhan is to mean certainty. Then over and above that, we find that here's a line of poetry that the Islamic legal theorists that they reproduce over here to further point out that the word dhan, literally what does it mean? It means yaqeen. So فَقُلْتُ لَهُمْ, I said to them. The poet's now saying, I said to them. This is in the context of the person saying to the others and telling them that there's an impending army coming your way. So what does he tell them? فَقُلْتُ لَهُمْ, I said to them, ظُنُّوا. My understanding of the text would be ظُنُّوا. So what does ظُنُّوا? In all probability? No. ظُنُّوا, be certain, بِأَلْفَيْ مُدَجَّجٍ, of 1,000 strong army, So again, the point here would basically be, that is using the word dhunna, not to think or to have knowledge in a probable way. No, be certain, dhunnu. So again, the word dhan, what does it mean literally? It means yaqeen. Furthermore, Khalil ibn Ahmad, he said dhan is shak and yaqeen. So if you look at Khalil ibn Ahmad's view, then it appears that the word dhan is mushtarak. In other words, it's one word, but it has two meanings. So the word dhan can be used to refer to shak, which is doubt, and dhan can also be used to refer to yaqeen. However, despite what Khalil ibn Ahmad has said, theologians and legal theorists have developed jargon from the word dhan juxtaposed to shak and yaqeen. So when we look at the word dhan in a technical sense of the word, then make no mistake, dhan is exactly what Imam al-Haramain has said. We're leaving behind us now the literal meaning and Khalil ibn Ahmad's approach in terms of it being a mushtarak word. We look into the technical usage of the word dhan. Dhan is technically, what does dhan refer to? تجويز أمرين أحدهما أظهر من الآخر. When there are two possibilities, but the one meaning is probable. The one of the possibilities is more probable. So Ibn al-Firkah now provides us with an example. So he says, dhan is the preponderant of two possibilities, like the possibility of rain and no rain. In winter, when there are clouds and the wind is blowing favorably. So now you're standing outside. So there's two possibilities. There's a possibility of it raining and there's a possibility of it not raining. These are two possibilities. Like right now, wherever you may find yourself in the world, there's a possibility it will rain now, it's possible not rain now, it's both possible. But what do you find now? If you look at the circumstances, it happens to be winter. This is now here in the southern hemisphere. It happens to be winter. And also there are clouds. And the clouds are, the wind is blowing favorably. So in many climates, you'd find that people know certainly if the southerly wind, then there's going to be rain. Clouds and southerly wind, rain. If there's clouds but there's a northerly wind, then there's going to be no rain. There's going to be rain but not here because the clouds are going to blow it away. So you have two possibilities. But because of the circumstances mentioned, you have now what develops a dhan. There's two possibilities, but the one possibility is more probable. It goes beyond 50%, it's 75%. So what are you going to say now? In all probability, it's going to rain. That is what we refer to as dhan. You cannot say categorically it's going to rain, but in terms of the probabilities, it's probably going to rain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So the last paragraph here is the preponderant of the two options is rain and therefore dhan. The opposite, less preponderant possibility is referred to as a wahm. So now if I'm standing outside and my friend and I, we are looking and he says there are clouds, it's winter, there are clouds, the wind is blowing favorably. He tells me it's going to rain. I say, no, it's not going to rain. He's going to tell me that what you have there, it's possible, yes, but because it's improbable, we're going to refer to that as a wahm. So here we're getting used to all of the technology now. Not technology, sorry, the terminology. So the one is yaqeen, certainty. The other one is dhan, probability. And the opposite of the probability, when it's possible for it to happen, but it's very unlikely to happen, then we refer to, when you go with that particular possibility, we refer to that as wahm, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. There is a criticism which is leveled at the definition provided by Imam al-Haramain, because he says dhan is tajweezu amrain. Dhan is the idea of tajweez, of considering two possibilities and the one being more preponderant than the other one. That is what Imam al-Haramain defines dhann as. But Ibn al-Firqah, he says that dhann is actually not the idea of considering two possibilities and the one of them being the more probable of the two possibilities, but rather dhann is al-rajih. It is the preponderant possibility. That is actually what dhann is, not the process, but the actual probable possibility of the two. That is basically what we refer to as dhann. So that is the type of criticism which Ibn al-Firqah levels at the definition provided by Imam al-Haramain. We go on to the next important concept that Imam al-Haramain seeks to familiarize us with before we go into Usul al-Fiqh proper. And what is that? He talks about the concept of shak. What is shak? الشك تجويز أمرين لا مزية لأحدهما للآخر. Shak, what we translate as uncertainty or doubt. What is that? Is to deem it possible for each of two things to be the case, without one being more likely than the other. So let's use the rain example. Is it going to rain? You say it might not. So in other words, there's a 50% chance of it raining. There's a 50% chance of it not raining. That is basically what shak is, 50-50. In other words, there's two possibilities, and the one possibility is not more preponderant than the other possibility. Both possibilities are equally possible. The one is not more probable than the other one. In that particular instance, is your friend coming to visit? You say he may come, he may not come. That is basically what we refer to as a shak, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. What is the literal meaning? What is the literal meaning of the word shak? This is the definition of shak according to the theologians and legal theorists. In language, however, shak is used as a synonym for dhann. So in as far as language goes, the word shak and dhann can be used interchangeably, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The next slide for me is a very important slide. It contains a very simple message, but yet very profound. What are we currently doing? We're not yet discussing Usul al-Fiqh proper. When we start a discussion on kalam, that's basically when we start our discussion proper. We are engaging in very important terminologies. Why have we gone through the trouble of defining these concepts? The concept of dhann, the concept of the opposite of dhann, which is wahm, the concept of shak. Why have we looked at all of these particular phenomena? Before that, we've looked at nazar, we've looked at fikr, we looked at istidlal and so forth. But here in this latter part of the class, we've basically looked what is dhann, what is wahm, and what is shak. Why do we do all of these things? We do all of these things for the following stated reason. So the purpose behind distinguishing dhann from shak, right, and the aforesaid from wahm. In other words, how different is, number one, how different is dhann from shak, and then how different is wahm from both shak and dhann. Why do we distinguish the two? Is to fix the opposites of ilm, which are dhann, wahm, shak, and i'tiqad. Now, the reason why we go through the trouble of looking at the definition of dhann, looking at the definition of wahm, looking at the definition of shak, is simply to distinguish this phenomenon from another phenomenon. And what is that phenomenon? That is the phenomenon of ilm, the phenomenon of ilm. So if you remember in a previous lesson, we've looked at this whole concept of ilm, which you can basically, ilm we translate as knowledge. But there's a difference of opinion amongst our scholars. Can ilm be defined, or can it, or can it not be defined? Now, so if you go with the view that said it cannot be defined simply because it need not be defined, but the fact that you don't provide a definition for it doesn't mean that you cannot facilitate for the understanding thereof. One of the ways of facilitating for the understanding of what ilm is, ilm, what are we talking about, ilm? Of what ilm is by way of, they refer to it as taqsim. So in other words, we're trying to understand ilm. So what is ilm? So I'm telling you what the opposites of ilm, what ilm is not. So when you understand what ilm is not, you get a good understanding of what ilm is, because of the rule that says al-ashya'u tu'rafu bi'addadiha, that things are known by its opposites. So now what happens is you understand the term dhann in light of what we discussed now. You understand the opposite of it, which is wahm. You understand shak. You understand i'tiqad. Imam al-Haramain doesn't give the definition of i'tiqad. I'tiqad basically is when you have two possibilities. Right? But then the difference between i'tiqad and shak is when you have shak, like is your friend coming or is not coming, then what happens is, then you say, look, he might come, he might not come. That's shak, 50-50. What happens is, in i'tiqad is, it differentiates itself from shak in that there are two possibilities, but the person having a particular i'tiqad, he commits to one of those particular possibilities. But generally, in terms of the way our scholars explained, he actually commits to the wrong possibility in such a way that he actually negates the other possibility, and he believes in the one possibility, but that possibility is also not based on sound knowledge. So that's basically i'tiqad. For example, a Christian, he says in his mind that there's a possibility of there being one God and there's a possibility of there being three gods. So what does he do? He goes for the possibility of that there's three gods, and then he totally denounces the other possibility of there only being one God. That we refer to as being an i'tiqad. So now, why do we go through all of the trouble of saying what dhann is, what wahm is, what shak is, and what i'tiqad is? We give that definition so that that is clearly defined and we get a good understanding of that. And the reason why we want to get that out of the way is because ilm is everything other than what that is. So once you negate that particular possibilities now, and then you say, okay, ilm is not dhann, ilm is not wahm, ilm is not shak, ilm is not i'tiqad, ilm is everything other than that. In other words, idrak, complete comprehension, idraku shay' ala ma huwa bih, understanding something as it is. So when we define all of these other concepts, it makes it easier for us to comprehend what this phenomenon of ilm is, or at the very least, when the word ilm is used, what it actually refers to. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So that's the purpose of this distinguishment. Now, in terms of Imam al-Haramain, now he's covered the terminology. So what is he going to do now is, he's going to now start with the discussion of Usul fiqh. Just to take a step back also, before mentioning these terminologies, what did Imam al-Haramain start off with? He said, what is the meaning of usul? It is a plural of the word asal, and he gave the meaning. What is the meaning of the word fiqh? He gave that. Now, having looked at that now, he is going to now discuss what is usul al-fiqh as a term, as a concept. We've looked at the term usul, we looked at the term fiqh. He's now going to give us, when you put it together and you say usul al-fiqh, what does that mean? But before doing that, we now go to Ibn al-Firqah's discussion. And he's going to explain to us now how our discussion is going to lead into usul fiqh as per what I gave you. But I think it's better just to read through the verbatim word of Ibn al-Firqah here. So he said, having mentioned the meaning of usul and fiqh and the phenomena that has to be conceptualized in the science, like ilm, dhann, shak, nazar, and dalil, Imam al-Haramain now addresses the intent of the term usul fiqh. So what happens now is, Ibn al-Firqah explains this particular phenomenon, usul al-fiqh. So Imam al-Haramain explained the term usul and he explained the term fiqh. But now what happens is, he has to put them together. He has to create this nisbah between the two and explain what that actually nisbah means. So he gives an example. Ibn al-Firqah gives an strange example. He says, you have by way of example Zaid, and you have a conceptualization of who Zaid is. And then you have an idea and you have an idrak of the concept of qamis. You've made a general nazar into the term qamis, and you understand the essence of what a qamis is. But now what happens is, you can understand the term Zaid, and you can understand qamis. In other words, Zaid and shirt. But unless you put it together, like qamisu Zaidin, and you say the shirt of Zaid, then I'm never going to understand the fact that it's Zaid's shirt. I might understand what shirt is. I might understand who Zaid is, but if you don't put it together for me in this particular manner, then I'm not going to get an understanding of Zaid's shirt. Likewise, if I explain the concept of usul to you and I explain the concept of fiqh to you, you can understand the two concepts as standalone. But it is only when you put it together as usul al-fiqh do I now say, okay, usul al-fiqh, the usul of fiqh. What does that mean now as a science? And that is basically what Imam al-Haramain is going to tell us, and he puts it together like that. So he says to us, wa usul al-fiqh. What is usul al-fiqh? So he says, wa usul al-fiqh turukuhu ala sabil al-ijmal. Usul, what is usul al-fiqh as a science, so to say? Turukuhu. The word turuk is the plural of the word tariq. In other words, pathway. Ala sabil al-ijmal. In other words, the pathways to fiqh. So Usul al-Fiqh, so just imagine here's fiqh, think of it as your destination. Here's fiqh, but what Usul al-Fiqh, what are the pathways that leads to the fiqh? So in other words, you pick up a fiqh book, you read all of the rulings, so that's fiqh. Ma'rifatu al-ahkam al-shar'iyyah, knowledge of the revelatory rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's basically what you find in a fiqh book. But in Usul al-Fiqh, what are you looking? Okay, what brought us here? What are the pathways that leads to fiqh? And it's turuku. But now, ala sabil ijmal, you can have a pathway that leads to the fiqh, but it's a very detailed pathway. That's fiqh. But usul fiqh is the pathways, but what are the general pathways? In other words, the broad lines, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So to provide a translation for that, the science of usul fiqh studies the general evidence of fiqh and how to adduce them as evidence. Now, so usul fiqh are the pathways that lead to fiqh, ijmalan, broadly speaking. The restriction, broadly speaking, excludes madhab and khilaf. Each is the pathway to fiqh except that they are detailed. So the broad pathways that lead to fiqh, not the specifics that lead to fiqh. If you discuss a specific dalil, so for example, we go back to our example in terms of miswak, usage of the toothstick. What is the ruling? You open up a fiqh book, usage of the ruling. You will read there. It says that it is mandub, it is recommended. Fine. Now, what is the tariq that leads there? So now I tell you the tariq that tells you that is the hadith. What is the hadith? لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرت بالسواك عند كل صلاة على سبيل المثال. So now what do we say? That this is the proof that tells you that it is recommended. That is, yes, it is a pathway that leads to the fiqh, but it's a detailed pathway that leads to the fiqh. That all forms part of fiqh. But when you tell me what is the ruling for this, I tell you basically that ruling comes from the sunnah. So now that is basically usul al-fiqh, because it looks at the tariq but not in a specific way. It looks at the tariq in a broad way. So turuquhu, usul al-fiqh ay turuqul fiqh, those pathways that lead to fiqh, but when you look at the pathways in which way, not in a specific way, but when you look at it in a general way, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So pathways refers to the proofs that establish the rulings, like akhbar, ijma and qiyas. Okay, so now that's the first step. You're going to look at the proofs. But now when you look at the proofs, now related to the proofs of fiqh, so now you're looking at it, but you're looking at it broadly, is the manner of extrapolation. So again, in broad terms, how do you extrapolate? So what is the proof that it is sunnah to make miswak? The proof for that is the sunnah, general. But now, how do I go to the sunnah in order to mine this particular ruling from the sunnah? In other words, kayfiyatul istilal. So I got the proof. I got the almost like the basically the fiqh is the water. Where do I get the water from? I must get the water from the well. There's like 4 wells: Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, and Qiyas. But now, how do I get the water out of the well? So that's the second part of usul fiqh, the manner of extrapolation. So related to the proofs of fiqh is the manner of extrapolation, like giving preference to specific evidence over general evidence. Do I take a bucket, or do I use the machine? What do I use? Carrying the unrestricted upon the restricted and applying mind to seemingly contradictory narrations. So usul fiqh is basically turuqul fiqh, the pathways that lead to fiqh. And then also usul fiqh will discuss the manners of extrapolation. What do you mean by manners of extrapolation? Like you have specific evidence and you have general evidence. In this particular instance, we're going to give preference to the specific evidence over the general evidence. Then we have what we refer to as mutlaq and muqayyad. What are we going to do? We're going to carry the unrestricted onto the restricted, and we're going to restrict it in that particular way. So you know the pathway, but how to access that particular pathway? There's a certain manner of accessing the pathway, so that is referred to as kayfiyatul istilal. So turuqul fiqh, the pathways of fiqh. The manner of extrapolation is the second one. Then so now you know, okay, there's pathways leading to fiqh. There's a manner of extrapolation. Who's going to do the extrapolation? And this brings us to the third aspect of usul fiqh, and that is wahalul mustafid, the condition of the person actually doing the extrapolation. Is he a muqallid? Is he a mujtahid? Are there requirements or not? So in a nutshell, this brings us to I think this is it's the second last the second last, but really the last point we're making today, and that is to summarize. Usul al-Fiqh comprises of the proofs of fiqh, how to employ the same, and who is qualified to utilize the tools of extrapolation. And the last slide that we do today here, Imam al-Haramain basically just looks at the chapters and he lists them. We're going to be doing everything in detail, but for your benefit, here we have a slide which basically covers the Abwab Usul al-Fiqh. What does he say? The topics are the following: Aqsamul Kalam, the types of speech; Al-Amr, command; Nahyu, prohibition; Al-Aam wal-Khas, inclusive expression, non-inclusive expressions; Wal-Mujmal wal-Mubayyan, indeterminate expressions and determining expressions; probabilistic expressions; now, prophetic actions; abrogated evidence; scholarly consensus; transmitted reports; analogy; the presumptive ruling of sacred law; resolving evidentiary conflicts; the attributes of the mufti and the mustafti, and other miscellaneous issues. So I've gone through that very quickly, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, simply because we're now going to start from our next lesson, breaking each and every one of these down and going into the necessary detail required. Barakallahu feekum, and thank you for joining us. Remember me in your pious applications. Allah bless you and grant you the best of this world and the next. وجزاكم الله خير الجزاء والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.